Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming today to the 8th International Conference of Sophia Journal. My name is Olivia da Silva. I'm from Polytechnic of Porto, and I be today moderated this panel in the morning, during the morning. Here in the with me is Maria Neto in my right side, and in my left side is Nuno Grande, and we are now to go speaking in the first part of this morning. And I would like to introduce Maria Neto. Today she goes speak about the open call, the Sophia Journal, about landscape, and is the 9th volume, and I think it's close. Yes, it's the last volume we have. Maria Neto is an architect, and she's invited as assistant for the UB, the university in Portugal as well. She researched on the FAUP in this faculty, and she as well is was a scholarship from FCT, and as well she has several prizes. One is a prize from Madrid University as well, or on Madrid faculty as well. And she represents this university and research in the different countries outside. One is about supporting refugees in Kenya and the UK. She as well to receive a prize from Fernando Távora, an architect, Portuguese architect. As well, she was guest speaker in the Portugal International Exhibition in the Biennale de Venice. And she's still working on these new generation housing policies. And she's a person normally present in all these conferences, and responsible for lots of research between these areas of visual studies and photography and architecture. And now I invite Maria to speak. Yes.
Thank you. Well, okay. Well, first of all, Pedro, the members of this panel, and the public audience, good morning. I'm delighted to be back here at this conference, now Sophia Conferences, 10 years after my first collaboration with the research group Architecture, Art and Image. I want to thank Pedro Leoneto, acknowledge the organizing team and the Faculty of Architecture for the welcoming and hospitality we are experiencing here. Sophia Journal is now closing the cycle of landscapes of care, addressing research, projects, experiences, and contemporary photographic and visual practices that focus on how architecture, understood in a broad sense, can help to heal the relationships between man and habitat, as well as the socio-environmental crisis that the planet is experiencing. The concept of landscapes of care has increasingly been adopted by diverse areas of study, from health geography to the arts and architecture. Transposed here in this call as the action of the social state in the housing sector, which generates a relationship of care between the state and society, framed by economic, social, and cultural rights. In this call, we are interested in investigations and visual narratives that help us understand and document practices outside the dominant narratives, which promote the right to housing but also the right to the city, calling on the city and the territory as a living and inclusive organisms, recognizing the importance of public resources and social responses, participatory processes, and co-responsibility for global sustainability. This issue is not by chance focusing on public housing. Once we were called to contribute to this challenge, as access to housing has once again become one of the most urgent problems to be resolved in our country. In this context, we mobilized an editorial team formed by 3 women from 3 different generations. Joan McDonnell, invited editor from Chile, Paz Núñez Martí from Spain, and myself from Portugal. with different but significant experience on the housing sector for vulnerable communities, with the objective to cross different theories and practices from multiple geographies. With this movement, we celebrate as well, comparing achievements, alignments, or rupture, the book edited 30 years ago by Joan MacDonald on Vivienda Social, Reflexiones y Experiencias. With this new call entitled Landscapes of Care, Public Housing Across Multiple Geographies, Crossing Theories and Practices, allows contributions to be centered on a dynamic reading of the city that is conditional and conditioned by housing typology. Combining architecture, public housing, habitat, and urban planning, we are convoking works that explore an interpretive narrative about housing and those who live in it, pilot projects with communities of practice capable of generating strategic visions about the possible future of city and territory, and the lives it transforms in this ontological relationship between man and house. Public housing should be an example of innovative practices, whether in design or urban and territorial development. However, most interventions carried out through housing policies or specific and isolated actions on public housing are not sufficiently known and disseminated by authorities or technicians and researchers involved with, failing to produce broad knowledge and debate. Our objective is to make known these practices that intertwine theory and action and explore how photography, surveys, testimonies, and documentaries can be used as a significant research instrument in the socio-economic, political, historical, technical, and ecological dimensions of public housing. The city and the territory revealing good practices and interventions that are not the solution to the broader problem, but can cause change through influence. Launching a critical look at city making from its dominant program, housing, we also intend to establish relationships of continuity or rupture, alignments and or gaps between housing and urban socio-political and architectural thought nationally and internationally. We are also interested in photography and film work that allow us to acknowledge social and political dimensions of architecture and landscape, and understand architecture, as Álvaro did, as a great synthetic process of combining thousands of different human functions, together with Donna Haraway's focus on human and no-human interaction, the new nature culture, capable of contributing to a greater understanding of the potential of architecture and landscape for a more ecological and sustainable balance and interaction between architecture and nature. All this information will be available in our online platform, and the works can be submitted through the online platform as well. For any questions, the editorial team is pleased to answer and help, so we really encourage you to submit works. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria Neto, for this introduction and asking for a call. And I would like now introduction Nuno Grande is the next speaker on this panel today. And Nuno Grande today he will present a book about another approach on the works of Álvaro Siza. We go speak about the book you have in hand now, yeah? University of Porto as well. He have a PhD in the architecture from Coimbra University. He did that in 2009, and he works on this research about culture, political and space, and is a professor associated in the University of Coimbra. As well, is a professor on the MA in the College das Arts in Coimbra as well, yes, and he was a curator and in the different countries like Brazil, Italy, France, and in the different big events like Porto 2001 and Capital Europeia da Cultura, Bienal da Arquitetura em São Paulo, no Brasil, e ainda a Capital Europeia da Cultura em Guimarães, Bienal de Veneza, well, in the different important events, national and international. As well, he has different articles in the different reviews in Portugal, Spain, France, Swiss, Holland, Croatia, Korea, Japan. And as well, he has some publications in the culture, urban culture, yes. And he as well, as I know, have a good looking for this contact between photography and architecture. And we go hear now him about this book is published. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I would like to start by thanking Pedro and all the team of this Congress. It's always a pleasure to come back to Ciza's faculty, where I have taught for some time. And speaking about him, I'm normally pointed as a specialist on Ciza's work, which I refuse. I'm not really a specialist. I did 2 exhibitions on his work, always trying to focus one issue of this work, because it's such an overwhelming production that we can go on through decades looking at his production, not only in architecture, but on drawing, writing. And I really enjoyed receiving this book by Pedro, and he asked me to talk about it this morning, because photographing Ciza is really a mission. I think it's one of the most photographed architects in the world, and it's always difficult to think how is these people, how will they look at Ciza in a different way, as Pedro asked them to do. And I think this book is a proof there can always be a new look on Ciza. And so I imagine this title that can be read like 2 actions: photographing Ciza and caring about landscape, or photographing Ciza while he's caring about the landscape. And I have my own perspective on how he cares about landscape, and I really enjoyed that you have put this picture of his Venice building, which is another issue about caring, which means caring about the social fabric of a city. I'm going to speak about mostly about the natural landscape, but of course the social landscape and the urban landscape in his work is something quite important. Okay, let's start. This is a very interesting book because, as I said, it gave me, or it permitted me to prove some of the ideas I had already on Ciza's work and its relation with nature and with life. And in this book, apart from the introduction by the author himself, we have different texts that somehow contribute for this new reading of Ciza and the relation between photography, art, and architecture. One of these articles is by Olivia, and it's about photography as a document and how architecture, or architecture on photography, not photography of architecture, we have to make this distinction, how architecture in photography can reveal something that goes beyond the document itself. It can reveal something about the architect, about the process of work, about the constraints of building in some areas. So the idea of Olivia is that photography, when it relates with architecture, sometimes speaks about something which is beyond the object itself. And then we have Antonio Chopina evoking Le Corbusier, and this interesting phrase that he left us in his book Vers une architecture, the idea that eyes should see more than is normally apprehended or seen in a building. Eyes should go and see a new aesthetic revolution, as he claimed at the time, and it should go into form in a new perspective, which was not normally seen by historiography at the time. So we should see things that eyes do not see. And Chopin says, in the case of Siza, this relation goes beyond the aesthetic thing. It goes also to the ethic thing, which is the relation with nature, which we can easily see or brilliantly see in the photographs of João Leal and Mark Durden upstairs in the other building. The idea that the buildings permit us to see something more than the building itself, but how life and nature and daylight trespasses or overpasses the building and its windows. And then Mark Durden speaks a little bit about that also in the text here, how architecture doesn't make sense without its relation with life and the world, and how photography can be seen as a document, as a portrait of life, or just as a commodity. As we know today, we are overwhelmed with images. Image became a dominant thing in our lives. And his text is also about how photography should be attentive to this relation with life and with daily life. Then other two texts by Jorge Figueira and José Maceres de Carvalho, they are also interesting because they were written for the first edition, and it's about how image was so important for publishing Portuguese architecture, not only in Portugal, but also in foreign countries, from the modern period to the postmodern period. And Maceres de Carvalho also makes this very interesting interaction between documentary photography and street photography, and how somehow contemporary photographers also like to portray daily life, street daily life, as part of an urban document, and how this look, for example, to peripheries or to forgotten places is revealing another way of or is documenting another way of portraying cities. Okay, and then, of course, all the research that Pedro did in his postdoctoral research team, which is part of this book, and it's a very interesting survey on how art, photography, and architecture can be related. I think it's the most academical and interesting, historiographically interesting piece of the book. But I prefer to speak about the curatorship that he did with these 6 photographers, and how it permit me to write my own. Well, this is part of this approach that Pedro has been researching for more than a decade. It's been more than a decade that you've been around this subject. But I would like to speak about my own text in this book, which, of course, taking some of the words I said, are we all photographers? Now that we all have a camera, are we all photographers of architecture? This is my question, because I'm more interested about how architecture is received or perceived by people who consume daily images from the social networks, from Instagram, Facebook, etc. And Siza, as I said, must be one of the most photographed architects in the world, not only by photographers, but also by the non-photographers like us, like some of us. And does it make those pictures become documents, photographies, or not? That was my question. And I came with this idea because I organized an exhibition at the Serralves Museum with Carlos Muro about his work, about 60 years of his work. And we, on purpose, we didn't put any picture of his work on the walls. First, because we were in an art museum and we wanted to claim that architecture is not really an art. It can be also an artistical approach, has an artistical approach, but we don't need walls to work. We need tables. And so that's why we made this connection between the table that Siza designed for the skylight and the table of the architect. And we only portrayed models and drawings and sketches with no pictures, because we knew that if anyone would be interested on knowing something about the building, he could use his phone and just put it on the phone and see if the work was built, how it was maintained, how it was lived. So in a way, we decided that this exhibition should not have any illustration, or we didn't want to use photography as an illustration of architecture. But of course, we invited photography to be part of the exhibition in one room, in a corridor, where we portrayed all the iconic photographs of Siza's work from the 1960s to now. And we also put the magazines and the books where they were published for the first time. And it was quite surprising for me to see, from the first publication to the last, how the role of photography in these publications. In the early ones, for example, Contro Spazio of 1972, the photographs are Siza's photographs, or at least of his studio. They're not credited. They are black and white, and they are really, really small compared with the long critical texts about his work, in this case by Nuno Portas, as the Italians called them at the time, him at the time. And it's very interesting to see how the role of photography. Photography is there just to make words become visible in a way, but in a very tiny and not credited way. We don't know who are the photographers of these early publications. And then we would go on this corridor until, I'm not going to bother you, until the last ones. And on the last ones, like El Croquis or the Taschenbuch of Siza, the pictures or the images were overwhelming, big pictures, filling the whole page, very colorful, big skies, blue skies, and the text would be like 3 lines about his work, normally in 3 languages, and the photographer was immediately identified. Sometimes he was the co-author of the book, which tell us that something about how the text, the critical text, almost disappeared from these books, or at least there are some preliminary texts in the beginning, and then the books is all filled up with pictures, colorful, beautiful, glamorous pictures of Siza's work, and the text almost disappears. And this made me think, as I said, about this, what I call, and the architect himself became also a star, so it's not just a star, the star architect is also the star photographer in some of these publications. And this made me think about this relation between imagephilia or imagophilia and imago or imageology. So we are living an imagophilia, all of us. Every day we take pictures, every day we publish pictures in our social networks. We are somehow invaded by these architectural images, a critical production, displaying and consumption, in the same hasty way that the digital consumer scrolls pictures on a screen. We are scrollers, crawlers and scrollers. And somehow, similar to other objects of contemporary cultural hedonism, architecture has become a media-based product, more to look at than to be visited or experienced, more to give me a like than to be appreciated, more for optical than haptic enjoyment. And I'm making a self-critic because I'm also an Instagrammer and I like to publish pictures, but I don't consider myself a photographer. But fortunately, we also have these imageologists like Pedro and most of you who are photographers, not of architecture, but who like architecture in photography, who deal with architecture images as critical production, as critical publishing, as critical documentation, as a reflective practice, mostly based on a personal or institutional research like the one Pedro is directing here. Through this artistical or scientific gaze, because it can have something of scientific also, Architecture becomes, in this book and in Sophia Journal, part of a curatorial and an editorial narrative, as occurs in the field of literary images, which somehow, where the word imageology comes from. So we are all image philes, but we are also very keen on imageologists like you are, some of you are. And I have to tell you, well, we are living in the selfie moment. When social media started, when social networks started, I don't know, 30 years ago? I don't know when did Facebook appear? Well, 15% of the pictures that were published were self-made pictures. 85% came from studies, books, reproductions, etc. Today it's the opposite. Today only 15% of the images that we see in social networks are coming from, this imageology approach. All the rest is just a kind of ego trip that everybody lives daily. Even me and Paolo yesterday, we were very keen on making selfies with this local hero, Porto local hero, football local hero. Anyway, and just to finish, I'm going to talk about the 6 photographers that Pedro curated in his book, these imageologists that he invited, and I'm going to try to take from them an idea of how does Siza cares about landscape, which is the subject of our conference. So the first work that he shows is from Sophia. I don't know if Sophia is not here today, Sophia Augusto. She was a student in this house, in this faculty, and I really like the way she portrays her faculty by having different cameras, which takes a picture at the same time, a kind of kaleidoscope perspective of the same scene seen from different angles, and you see the same guy running in different pictures in the same moment, taken from different perspectives. So she introduces the idea of process, the idea of movement. Even if she frames the movement, we can understand that this space is an architectural promenade, and that our body relates with this space according to the side, or the position of the way we see it, we perceive it. So the idea of process and architectural promenade, it's in her work. And then Elder Souza, he also speaks about the tea house promenade. I think this is one of the most magical moments of Portuguese architecture, when we have to climb these stairs to go to the tea house, and then suddenly it's just us and the Atlantic Ocean. And Siza creates this kind of detour to making us understand not only his architecture, but the landscape around. Is he caring about the landscape? Of course. But he's not totally respectful of this landscape. He modifies it to make it better, to reveal it in the most beautiful way. And I think that's one of the big properties of architecture, is to somehow demysticize what was before it happened. And then Quinta da Conceição by Sérgio Rolando. Sérgio is here, I saw him today. Which is also very interesting. Sérgio was looking for this kind of uncanny objects that Siza left in this project, these strange elements. We don't really understand why they are there, this kind of pyramid. But he photographs these different moments during the day, showing how the same feature or the same object reveals itself in different moments of light, of daily light. So again, the idea of process, which I think is quite interesting. So it's not just the framing or the frozen moment of the photography, but to explain the object, or to explain the architecture with the same perspective in different moments of a day. And then Marta Ferreira, which I think is also very interesting, because she shows us this anthropological appropriation of the swimming pool, with this kind of randomness or this carelessness of the owners who just leave some chairs stored anywhere. We could say maybe the architect didn't think about this, but this is the appropriation of architecture. So it's as I said, an anthropological perspective of how people use the space, which is also very important to understand a building. And then finally, João Leal and Mark Durden, who, of course, do the same thing, I would say, in a more phenomenological way, which how the phenomenon of nature, of light and shadows, how they reveal themselves through the glass, through the windows of this incredible building, and how nature somehow reflects itself, or how architecture becomes a kind of blank sheet that's waiting for life to be written on. So I have learned a lot about how Siza cares about landscape with these photographers, with these 6 photographers. And it made me think about the use of light and the use of shadow in architecture. Of course, Le Corbusier, and we always have to go back to Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier was not only talking about this new aesthetic, this avant-garde aesthetic, but how light was so important to reveal this magnificent and correct game of volumes or assembled in the light. So a very solar, a very positive, a very optimistic perspective of the future of modernism. And then 10 years later, how Tanizaki said, well, but we in the East world, in the Orient, we praise shadows, we like shadows. I think shadows are also important, not only light, not only this very positive solar perspective of life, but also this dark relation with space, mostly interior space as we see inside Japanese houses. And I think Siza combines it very well, this idea of a modern enlightenment and this caring about the little spaces who have no light, where light does not reach them, but shadows and darkness are also important. This traditional relation with the interior, with this intimate use of space. And that's why I think he's at the same time modern and postmodern, traditional and avant-garde. I think Siza combines very well these 2 dimensions. And just to finish, the works of Álvaro Siza do care about landscape, yet with no fear or modesty. They are just frames of that learned game between the magnificence of light and the beauty of shadows that permeates nature. With Siza, we learn that architecture may be a blank sheet waiting for life to be written on it. And we can really see this in Mark and João photographs, especially those ones when nature mixes itself with its shadow or reflection on architecture. And at the same time, the works of Álvaro Siza, again, do care about landscape, yet with no fear or modesty. They are just gestures that reveal and reclaim nature in its given imperfections. Nature is imperfect, and sometimes architecture has to correct this imperfection. With Siza, we learn that architecture can become a second nature, with which the primary nature, may attain new senses. And I think we can see it quite well in this picture by Marta Ferreira. You will have the chance to see the pool in the afternoon. And I really love those pictures when the water of the swimming pool is not there, and suddenly the walls, the concrete walls, become part of this natural, if we can still call it natural, landscape. I normally say this is an earthwork or a land art project. And I think if Siza would have been a sculptor like he wanted to be in the early days of his life, he would have been a land art sculpture, because I think this is a land art project. And when the water is not there, we immediately understand that these walls are part of those rocks, and those rocks are part of these walls. And the combination between this primary nature and this second nature is the way I think architecture, and especially Siza's architecture, do care about landscape. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Nandgrand, about this thought between photography and architecture, and between this idea about imagology.
Imagology and imagophilia.
Yeah. I read your text before, and it's interesting how you organize these different photographers and different photographs. And this last one you show here about Marta Ferreira, yes, the last one, and the mix between rocks and
walls.
Yeah, and I would like to ask you a question as well about the connection between this kind of work and Ferreira Alves, who is in the book as well. And Ferreira Alves, as you know, Marta Ferreira works with him, and but she have a different line, I think, yes, on photography. But this book as well is bringing some of this work. And what's really meaning these different ways of looking the work of Álvaro Siza?
Well, I knew Luís Ferreira Alves quite well, and I think he's somehow a master that influenced a lot of these younger photographers, some of them architects. And but I think Luís belongs to this long tradition of architecture photographers, not photographers of architecture, which somehow enhances the object, enhances the building, and enhances the how do you say, the plastic property of the building, of the space. Normally not photographing people or leftovers objects or random things. He always portrays it in a very prepared way. And I think even though they are beautiful pictures and they are classical, I think he's a classic already. What I like about this young generation is that they go a little bit beyond what Luís has taught them by, as I said, living on the scene what is there. Not preparing it, but somehow photographing it as it is, with all the randomness and the catalyst situations that we find in architecture. I know if Luís would be in this room photographing, he would change some lamps, because he knows that Siza doesn't like those lamps to be on the stairs, of course. But he would take them out to photograph this room. I think this young generation, because maybe they're not so attached with friendly relationships with the architects, they create this critical distance with the architect, and they're more interested about the architecture and the user of the architecture than the architect himself, because they're not commissioned I think they were not commissioned to make a beautiful documentary on that project. They were just asked, give us your view on the object, on the space, about the space, and so they would take it as it is. You know, I think this is the difference between an architect and a photographer that had a good relationship with the architects he knew, and for the first time he was revealing their work. We have also to think about the pioneering aspect of Luís Ferreira Alves' project, because and work. He was revealing for the first time these architects, and now these young architects, younger, Mark is very young, are revealing another way, another perspective, which is not already to let people know the project, because they are already very well known. It's a new perspective, a new way of looking, especially departing from the user's point of view, or from the randomness or the careless aspects that architecture also incorporates. I think that's the big difference I see in my... But of course, Luís is here. Luís is always here in the way they frame, they choose the angle, they try to give the importance of the light and the shadow that Luís would give. Refusing Photoshop, refusing any post-production on the photography. I think His school is there. But I think these people are now trying to come up with a new vision of how these buildings should be portrayed.
Yes, I'm just asked this question. Maybe some people here don't know Freire Alves. He didn't show any image. Yes, he's a commercial photographer, and he's the different aims, yes, in his work. But normally he knows a lot about what's going on in the architecture, or, well, now he's dead, but is why as well I speak about him, because he's very important for some photographers. How he deal with the people, he photograph his buildings, and as well with Cisa and others. And I thought it's interesting to speak about him today. I think this homology you speak about is a lot about research as well of these young people, really rethinking, yes, how they can photograph this kind of space, place, territory, etc. And is why I speak about behind documentary, because it's about as well about that. And some images you show is really show here like Marta, like Sergio, Elder, for example, others young. They really thinking behind the document, and this is quite interesting for, I think, for photography as well, for architecture. I don't know if anybody wants to ask some question as well, because we go to interval after the break. A break, I'm sorry. It not exist, a break after. But I don't know if anybody wants to ask some question.
I'm suspect, so I
Good. Well, I can say the book is really interesting, because there are lots of literature, fantastic in this book. Is in this way is really a fantastic book to this getting close these two areas, scientific areas. It's not just image, it's not just photographers, it's as well lots of literature in this book. Is quite good and big research about Pedro. Yes.
But maybe I was a little bit unfair, because it's true. Half of the book is a long survey. It's a postdoctoral research that you did, which I think it's amazing. But I enhanced, for me, what is your curatorial perspective on photography, which goes on with this imageology that I was trying to defend.
maybe now I can also say that something that wasn't referred or explained is how the work with the design was so important, and mostly in the second edition. So how the layout and the design and the combination of the text and the images, understanding, for example, each text of each author, the paragraphs and what was more important in the whole text, and give it a different layout, and the combination of open spaces with the text and the images, and always through this this unique way that the book tells us a story, a cinematic story, and how the promenades, which were never linear, as you understood, allowed for a different reading of the space and of architecture. So it's very important. It's almost the authors, the photographers, of course, and well, the editor, and in this case, well, the author of the text, but then the designers. And this combination that worked so well explains I think the quality of the book in an overall sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we go to a break for 10-20 minutes. Yes. Thank you very much. We see you in a bit again. Obrigada.